Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in the words of Torah that start to wind up the book of Deuteronomy. We only have one more parsha in the book of Deuteronomy, and that, of course, is what we read at Simchat Torah, when we end Deuteronomy, good morning, and begin Genesis again. So we are coming to the end. You can always tell, like the Torah scroll gets like massive, right, on one side. You have to be careful who you ask to lift and dress Torah at this part of the year, because it's like incredibly lopsided, incredibly heavy. All right, so we talked last time. We studied Parshat Vayelech, and I was telling you how sad I was this year for Moshe. And if you'll recall, at the end of last week's Parsha, he says, chapter 31, verse 29, "For I know that when I'm dead, you will act wickedly and turn away from the path that I enjoined upon you, and that in time to come misfortune will befall you for having done evil in the sight of God, vexing God by your deeds." Then Moses recited the words of this poem to the very end in the hearing of the whole congregation of Israel. That poem is what we're about to read. That poem is Haazinu. So it is the poem that deals with what will be the betrayal of the Israelites, of their agreements. That remember, this is placed in the mouth of the generation that is entering the land of Israel. Of course, this is written long after. Heaven and earth will be called as witness, which is very much the usual for the prophets to start. Right? When they want to start a speech, they want to censure Israel because it's their job, right? Only Jews canonize our critics, right? So the prophets are always coming to complain about Israel and how Israel's getting it wrong and messing everything up. And so heaven and earth often are called to be witnesses against Israel by the prophet. All right, so somebody read for us at 32:1.
Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. May my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. In the name of Adonai I proclaim, give glory to our God, the rock, whose deeds are perfect. Yea, all God's ways are just, a faithful God, never false, true and upright indeed. Unworthy children, that crooked, perverse generation, their baseness has played God false. Do you thus require Adonai, O dull and witless people? Is not this the Father who created you, fashioned you, and made you endure? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of ages past. Ask your parents who will inform you, your elders who will tell you. When the Most High gave nations their homes and set the divisions of humanity, God fixed the boundaries of peoples in relation to Israel's numbers. For Adonai's position is this people, Jacob, God's own allotment. God found them in a desert region, in an empty, howling waste. God encircled them, watched over them, guarded them as the pupils of God's eye. Like an eagle who rouses its nestlings, gliding down to its young, so did God spread wings and take them, bear them along on pinions. Adonai alone did guide them, no alien God alongside. God set them atop the highlands to feast on the yields of the earth, nursing them with honey from the crag and oil from the flinty rock, curd of kine and milk of flocks, with the best of lambs and rams of Bashan, and he-goats, with the very finest wheat, and foaming grape blood was your drink. So Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and gross and coarse. They forsook the God who made them and spurned the rock of their support. They incensed God with their alien things, vexed God with abominations. They sacrificed to demons, no gods, gods they had never known, new ones who came but lately, who stirred not your forebears' fears. You neglected the rock who begot you, forgot the God who labored to bring you forth.
All right, let's stop there for a moment. All right. This is a psalm. And we've talked a little bit about what makes poetry clever and literary. There's a couple of genres going on here. But so remind us all what makes this kind of biblical Hebrew poetry clever and literary. What's the device? It's not about rhyme. What's it about?
First letter.
So sometimes it's using the first letter.
No punctuation. No punctuation.
Well, there's no punctuation ever.
Well, it repeats.
In Torah. So, Robert, say it again.
It repeats. It's repetitive.
All right. So the way that biblical poetry is clever is that you say the same thing two different ways. Mm-hmm. That's the mechanism. It's not rhyme. It's not. What's the other one? Meter, right? Or rhythm. That's not what you're trying as the poet to use to craft something that people will go, oh, look at that. It's saying the same thing two different ways. And can you continue to do that? And can you do that in a way that's literarily sound, right? So, may my discourse come down as the rain, my speech distill as the dew. It's the same idea said two ways, right? That's a big part of, so it feels repetitive, but to the biblical poetic ear, that's what they're listening for.
It's emphasis.
And it's like, oh, well, how will they say that? You say something that's like, oh, well, how are they going to say that again, right? In a way that's interesting. Okay. So sometimes what we have, which is good that you ask, Mehmet, is you get alliteration in the Hebrew that you don't get in the English often. And I mean, it's not that it's one device. There's many devices, but what you miss from Hebrew into English often is the alliteration of certain words that follow in a row. So I'll point it out when I see it. All right. So, like showers on young growth, like droplets on the grass. Right. This is the way it's written. This. Since we know more about ancient Near Eastern traditions and ancient Near Eastern literature, this now we know belongs to a genre where the conquering vassal, yes, the conquering king or queen, charges the conquered vassal nation with disloyalty. So this is a testimony against, I said vassal king to start with. The conquering king is charging the vassal king, the vassal nation, with disloyalty. Because remember, the conquering king gets to say, you worship and serve only me. Because I did this, for I conquered you. I went to war, I did this, I did that. Therefore, I, Queen Amy, have the right to demand of you exclusive loyalty. That is a covenant arrangement, yeah? And in turn, I agree to protect you from neighboring whoever who wants to start something with you. I will protect you. But you owe me exclusive loyalty. This, we know, is the covenant that we see in Torah. God is king. I, God, am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. I took you out of Egypt. I took you out of the house of bondage. Therefore, right, I have exclusive rights to your loyalty. And if you break that, I am an Elkanah, right? I get to express kin'ah. what gets horribly translated into English as jealousy. I am a jealous God. I am a God who is entitled to kin'ah if you break the agreement of exclusivity to me.
Is it vengeance?
It's what you're entitled to if somebody strays from loyalty to you when you have a claim on their exclusive loyalty. I don't think I don't know of an English word that vengeance may be what it looks like in terms of what's going to happen, but what God experiences is kin'ah, right? So it's vengeance is what's going to happen, maybe, but that's a consequence. God's experience when Israel strays is kin'ah.
Yeah.
It's what God is entitled to feel or experience because God was entitled to our exclusive loyalty and we betrayed that loyalty. That's what this poem is. This poem is a testimony against a vassal nation that has betrayed its exclusive loyalty to the conquering king. All right, we know that from other ancient Near Eastern literature. All right, so it makes sense, right? God is just. All God, right? Look at verse 4. Tzul, Hatzul, the rock. Tamim po'alo. All of God's doing is tam. Sometimes translated simple. If you go to a Jewish cemetery and look at headstones, you see ish tam. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here lies a tam person. Tam is a good thing. Tam is a good thing. So God, tamim po'alo. All of God's doings are tamim, are tam. So straightforward, simple, clean, good. I mean, it doesn't say good, but tam implies all of that.
I thought Tom was flavor.
Ta'am.
Oh, ta'am.
Ta'am is flavor. But then like in English, how we mush everything together. So you will hear tam, but it's ta'am. But like, what is it in Yiddish? Tam?
Tom is taste.
Yeah, so that's what she was saying, flavor, taste. Yeah. So it comes from ta'am in Hebrew, but like Hebrew speakers like all of us are lazy, and like what you hear is tam, but it's ta'am. All right.
In Yiddish also, the general apotropaic is kinahora, which means protection against kina.
Against what?
Kina.
Kina. Keneged ayin hara. Against the evil eye. It gets all smished. Kinahara. Yes. Verse 4.
Okay.
Second word in Hebrew. It's plural because it's talking about all of God's po'alim, all of God's actions. Right? Hatzul, the rock, tamim po'alo. Tam are all of God's actions, but it's in plural. Tamim. Yeah? And now we're going to say the same thing another way. Ki chol drachav mishpat. For all of God's ways are just. Right? So God here is right. God is blameless. God is El Emunah, ve'en avel. God is El Emunah, a faithful God. God is faithful. $50 to your favorite charity. El Emunah ve'en avel. God is only Emunah, is only faithful with no falsity. Sadiq ve'yasharhu. Right? Sadiq, tzedek, righteous, ve'yashar. And straight is God. Right? So the case is being made very clear. Who's in the right and who's in the wrong. Right? And so what happens to this amazing, wonderful El Emunah? This Tzaddik ve'yashar God, whose ways are tamim. What happens to this poor God? That God gets children unworthy of God. That crooked, perverse generation, their baseness has played God false. God, who was only faithful and only righteous and only good, gets played, right, by this horrible, awful generation of teenagers.
So is he speaking to those people
as being these teenagers now, or is he talking about what's going to happen in the future?
You tell me.
Both.
Good question.
So this generation hasn't screwed up yet.
Yeah.
They're not in the land yet. What's going to happen? God took you. God found you. Actually, we were studying this at Hartman. I never knew this before. But there is one theory of, not theory. There is a tradition that there were 70 gods, and each god got a people. And what does our poem tell us? And they want to argue this is a remnant of one of those traditions. That look at verse 9. Ki chelek yud he vav he amo Yaakov chevel nachalato. Right, we're saying the same thing two different ways. Ki chelek yud he vav he amo. For amo, God's people. Okay, I'm just going to use the Hebrew, even though I hate to do it, but it'll be clearer. Ki chelek yud he vav he amo. His people, amo, right, is the chelek, is the portion for yud he vav he. Meaning, yud he vav he got us. When all the peoples were divided among the 70 gods, the chelek that went to yud he vav he was us, amo, his people. But it wasn't because God picked us. Yaakov chevel nachalato. Yaakov was God's allotment, God's inheritance. God didn't get to pick.
Luck of the draw.
The luck of the draw. And what kind of luck does Yud He Vav He have? Bad. Really bad luck.
We don't know how bad all the other groups were, though.
Exactly. This is very true, but our poem is not concerned with them.
Yes.
Right? Only with the fact that God got a crappy deal. Yud He Vav He got a crummy deal. Yud He Vav He got a faithless nation. A faithless people.
Because that group needed a really strong, good parent. You know, the good kids didn't need such a perfect God.
So say more.
Well, I'm just saying, it's not to feel, poor God got this crummy group of kids. It was like, they give the best counselor at the camp the hardest cabin, right, to shape them up. So
that's a lovely way to understand maybe how the match happened.
Doesn't change the fact.
Doesn't feel to the author like this is great for Yud He Vav He. Right? Yud He Vav He is devastated that this people does this and behaves this way.
Who did the choosing?
Now that is a whole other conversation.
The 70 thing is...
Right? So it's a whole other thing. How does it happen?
Don't parents once in a while say that to themselves? How did I get this?
Once in a while.
That has never happened to me. Never.
Most of the time, that's what my mother said about her children.
I remember very distinctly as a child being told, may you have one just like you. And the heavens opened, the words went up, and it has been fulfilled.
After the session, and we're sitting with somebody, and he says, what does chosenness mean? We'll say, forget it, this is all an accident. It's serendipitous.
Yeah, there's definitely a strain.
God did not choose us. So why does everybody hate us if it's just an accident?
Well, it's partly we're the ones who emphasized Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, who chose us from among all the nations.
So if we shut up, anti-Semitism would disappear.
I would love to believe that that's the case.
But not quite.
I believe anti-Semitism is rooted in some other junk that isn't going away.
But it can't be chosenness then. If you read this literally, it wouldn't be chosenness.
Right, that's right. In this tradition, it is not chosenness. God got stuck with us. which makes sense, right? If you're writing from the critical end of Israel betraying monotheism, or not even monotheism, their allegiance to Yud-He Vav-He, it makes sense that it's like, well, God didn't pick this, right? God got stuck with this. Did I see another hand? Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the time in your comment that this was believed to be sort of an old tradition that it got grafted in, because most of the poems that we see in the Torah are older. They're pre-old texts, like Song of the Sea, whatever. This, however, being in Deuteronomy, it was not thought to be old, but it's referring to an old tradition.
There are
or this
some.
might be old.
There are some. Of course, scholars argue because we can't know. But I'll read to you from my notes, meaning the notes in my version, the JPS version, from the excursus at the back. They talk about some parallels to some other texts. These parallels probably indicate that Haazinu was written earlier than the prophets and Psalms 78 and 106. For it seems more likely that several prophets and psalmists were influenced by one classic poem, this one, than that the poem borrowed from several prophets who lived centuries apart and whose prophecies may not have been well known beyond their own disciples, right, until it gets published. But only the school of, remember, we've talked about the school of Jeremiah. That it isn't Jeremiah. It's the school of Isaiah, the school of Jeremiah. Often their work wouldn't have been known outside that circle until it's published, and we're holding it in our hands and reading it right at the high holidays, right? So it's unlikely that Haazinu, that has very close parallels to those prophets, it's very unlikely that Haazinu pulled from them. It's much more likely that they all pulled from Haazinu. So that's an argument scholars used to say this is a text older than Jeremiah and at least two of the Psalms that it has something in common with. Yeah? A relatively early date for the poem is suggested by its content and language as well. Commentators have long sought to date the poem by identifying the enemy and the events it describes. For traditional commentators who ascribe the poem to the time of Moses, dating the events was an exegetical exercise and a religious one as well, blah, 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 blah. For critical commentators, like us, the date of the events might provide a clue to the date and historical context in which the poem was composed. So I'm happy to give you the excursus to read further. And this poem was used in Second Temple times. So according to Josephus, copies of Haazinu and other biblical poems were kept in the temple. Rabbinic sources report that the Levites read parts of the poem in the temple while the Musaf offering was being made on Shabbos. They completed it over a 6-week cycle and then began again. So when Musaf was happening, when the extra sacrifice was happening on Shabbos, they would read a hunk of the poem. So it took 6 weeks. They read 6 hunks and then started again. It is interesting to note in this connection that one of the Qumran manuscripts apparently contained only the poem and was not part of a longer Torah scroll. So perhaps it was used for reading the poem on some similar occasion or for teaching the poem by heart, as chapter 31 commands. So even in Qumran, they had a standalone Haazinu. So it's like, it wasn't like part of Deuteronomy or part of, different Torah texts. It's just this one standalone copy of Haazinu. So clearly it was used, as a one-pager for some ritual purpose or teaching purposes.
Does Orthodoxy agree with the choice of who wrote what when?
Heck to the no. Right? Because
it's all written in God's hand and God's hand.
This is Moshe. Moshe gets all of this at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we have here this image of God as being true. God finds Israel in a desert region, in an empty, howling waste. God engirds Israel, watches over Israel, guards Israel as the pupil of God's eye. And of course, this very beautiful piece in 11. Eagle's not a great translation of Nesher. Nesher is probably The English word just went away. Raven. Eagle, probably not. Nesher, something with a wide wingspan. And like a nesher ya'ir kin'o. And here you hear kin'o. His kin, he is kin'ah. So this is, right? It's a play on words. It's kenesher ya'ir kin'o, as a nesher. What is this when you're doing this?
Fluttering.
Like a hummingbird, right? Like kind of, like hovers over, in a good way, over its young. But the word kin'ah is in there, right?
Ravens also have the aura of prophecy.
They do?
Yes, in much literature in English.
Okay. So some kind of connection, right, to divine wisdom or whatever, right? Al goes lav yerechef. So here's the mother bird, essentially, right? Kind of rousing its young and yirachefing, fluttering or whatever it's called, hovering over its young. So God, Yud He Vav He Badad Inchenu Ve'en Imo El Neche. Oh wait, sorry. Yifrosh Knafav Yikachehu. So God is going to spread God's wings, right, and carries the fledglings on the wings, right. So this is how birds teach their little ones to fledge. They kind of boot them out of the nest, and but fly underneath, right? So they can catch them and protect them from underneath. First of all, danger often comes right up at them, but it's also a way to fledge them. You're teaching them to fly, but you're giving them a place to land. So this is the image of God and Israel, right? Is that God's wings are spread and Israel is on God's wings. God alone did guide this crazy people, right? No alien God at God's side. This is important, right? No other gods were helping out. No other gods were in the nursery. Only Yud He Vav He. Single parent. All by God's self. Raised up this smart alecky, right? People. And took this people and set them atop the highlands to feast on the yield of the earth, fed Israel honey from the crag. So really, honey from the sela, from the rock, right? The shemen mechalamish tzu, and oil from the flinty rock. So we get that God, of course, gives them this land, this amazing land that's going to produce enough for them to get fat. We've heard this before, yes? Israel gets fat, and when Israel gets fat, Israel gets lazy and complacent, right? And says, I did this. This is my accomplishment, right? And forgets God who gave them this amazing land with all of its wonderful ways that it supports human beings. Forsook the God, right? Yeshuato. What is Yeshua? Yeshua, salvation. So scorned the tzur Yeshuato, the rock of this people's salvation.
Yeshua is Jesus.
No.
But isn't it the root for the word?
No. Yeshua, sometimes it's different from, it's not the same as Savior.
But it is salvation.
I mean, so it shares.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a proper name, Yehoshua, Joshua, right? That's. I mean, it's got those, resonances, but it's a proper name.
Got it. Okay.
Yakni Uhu. Oh, this is tangled. Some of the Hebrew is. I mean, it's a very different form of Hebrew, so it's part of how they date some of this stuff, right? So this whole idea that God continues to be the support, God continues to be the Savior. God continues to be loyal and faithful, and they turn to alien things, vexing God with abominations, right? Turning to gods they have never known. New ones who came but lately, right? All those Johnny-come-lately gods, right? Who stirred not your ancestors' awe, right? So they neglected the rock that begot them, forgot the God who brought them forth. So this is a condemnation of Israel. Tell me what we read about when we read about Josiah. What happened under Josiah? What was his religious reform about? What happened? Tell me some things that happened that shocked you. Y'all were all horrified. What did Josiah take out of the temple?
Prostitutes.
They're prostitutes. Holy, sacred prostitutes. And idols. People, y'all were horrified. Idols came out of the temple. How could idols be in the temple? Well, they were.
Well, what's shocking now is that this is an admission that there were other gods in competition.
But we know that.
Yeah.
We know that, right? So we've known that. That's why we have prophets. Because the people are always worshiping other gods. This is not monotheism. Right? No. Monotheism is very late. The way we understand monotheism, that there's only one God, that is not biblical.
Not then.
The Bible says you only get to worship Yud He Vav He. Shema Yisrael, Yud He Vav He Eloheinu. Right? Listen up, Israel. Yud He Vav He is our God. Not Baal, not Asherah, not Isis, not Astarte, right? Not Hercules. Your God is Yud He Vav He. You don't worry about all those other gods. Don't worry about what's going on with them. That's not yours.
It's a real transition in societal norms to go from all these gods fighting over who gets whom, and settling down finally into God, our God gets us, and the rest of them just kind of go about their way.
And
how long did that take?
A long time. And in every single period of Israelite occupation of the land,
it's gone on.
We have found idols. We have found representations of Asherah, of the feminine divine, right? There was never one period of Israelite inhabiting Israel where there was monotheism.
Are we still doing
Never. Syncretistic worship continued. Right? We saw it under Josiah, and they were destroyed not much after that. Josiah's taking sacred prostitutes out of the temple, for crying out loud. That was going on in Josiah's time.
I'm glad you didn't say for Christ's sake.
I know, right? Right? There's times I wish. So it never stopped. But there is a transition from there are other gods and we don't worship them, to an idea that there is only one God, and admitting that there are other gods is now its own form of disloyalty.
Was that by the time Christianity was established, do you think?
I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it.
So interesting.
Because it was clear.
But Christianity is one form.
By 300, it was pretty clear that there was only one God. 300 AD.
Well, I personally think that Christianity is in part a response to the longing that people have always had for the demigod, for the hero who is part divine, part human. Right? Is it really monotheism?
Well,
I don't know. There's this longing for another divine being that's more accessible than the God who has, by the time of Deuteronomy, retreated into God's heaven and is not so accessible anymore. God's not walking around the garden in the heat of the day anymore, people, right? So God is more withdrawn. And I think Christianity is an answer to a very old need to access the Godhead
through a human.
Differently, more intimately. So, and remember, that idea is around in the Middle East, like forever. Jesus is not the first incarnation, if you will, of that idea, right? That there is this idea that the God dies and rises, and the king is the symbol and has a symbolic death and then rises, and so it's the Christ. So Jesus as Christ is a new idea, but Christ is not a new idea. The risen God is not a new idea, nor is the divine cohabiting with a human being. Right? Think of Zeus.
Right. The Greeks and the Romans.
It happens all the time. So that idea is there, and Christianity is just one manifestation of it. So is it pure monotheism? I think it's fulfilling a lot of the needs that monotheism didn't answer.
Since I watched all the episodes of The Crown, one of them said that the queen, or king if it was invested with being godly and part God. And it's mentioned that, and I'm just trying to figure
Well, I think we need to fix. Yeah, I think we need to fix that a little bit. They rule by divine right.
So why divine? That God chose them?
Yes. Or else, how do you enforce your right to be the king? Yes, of course. It's because God put you there. How does the prophet have any authority? How does the prophet have the authority to come criticize the leadership? The king, God forbid. How? Because God told them to. Like you got to go higher than what you're accessing in order to say who crowns the king and queen? Who crowns them? Who puts the crown on their head?
Pope, the head of the church.
Of course. Right? Yes.
Well, look at our obsession with Marvels.
With what?
Marvels.
Marvel, like the comics.
Movies,
Right. The superhero.
The genre is
Right?
dominating.
That's exactly right. There's this. We want God to be God, sort of, but then we want some kind of mitigating in between human and God, right? We want that.
It shows the limitation of our own ego.
Absolutely.
Right.
Or a way to bridge, right, what feels like too big a divide. All right, so this poem is obviously one that is coming to explain what happens to Israel. Yeah? Because terrible things happen to Israel. Terrible things. And we know that they have to explain that, right? So this poem comes to explain that they're going to get, right? They're getting the consequences of turning against this faithful, amazing God. And by the way, many of these words are lifted and are said at a funeral. This is traditional Orthodox funeral language. Hatzor tamim po'alo. That line we read, that the rock, God's ways are perfect, is read at a funeral. So you can still see the need to understand and explain how this could happen. Right? Hatzor tamim po'alo. God is perfect. Right? And all God's ways are just. Which is why I hate that liturgy at a funeral.
Doesn't it also mean that you die because you've sinned?
So it doesn't go that far. It doesn't go that far. If they read the next verses, yes, but they stop. Right? They don't include those verses.
Okay, but you still get the Holocaust and all that was because 60% of the lawyers and doctors in Berlin before the war were Jewish and were living well, fat, if you will. And so is the Holocaust a punishment for that?
We've had this conversation lots of times.
Okay.
Last week.
Is there such a thing as punishment? I mean, the Holocaust itself, right? Like everything, and I hate to say this because my ancestors, my past in Auschwitz, so, from a young age, I kind of learned that and came to the acceptance my whole life is kind of everything, as hard as it is to swallow, happens for a reason. So it's not necessarily because doctors or people are, entitlement in a sense. It's just, why is it some people survive for 2 years?
So George is pointing to the traditional argument. People who have to defend an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God have to have a reason. It happens for a reason. What's the reason?
Well, in order to accept such atrocities, I mean, if you in the act of forgiveness, right?
We're not talking forgiveness. Everything happens for a reason. What's the reason?
We strayed.
God is all good. God is all powerful. God is all knowing.
So we were bad.
That's the only answer. The only answer is we deserved it, or one of those has to go away. Then God is not all powerful or all good or all knowing.
Those who die in vain instead of celebrating the lives that lived.
Fortunately, that's not our theology. Fortunately, I don't have an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing God. That's the goodness. I don't have that, so I don't have a problem. Right? Theologically, I don't have a problem. My God is not all-powerful. It's not a being. It doesn't make decisions. It doesn't kill people and not kill people. Right? So, but people who have this God, right, have to, yes. So George is lifting up the traditional, we got fat, fill in the blank, in Switzerland, in Vienna, in Berlin, and the consequences.
And, first time I heard it was just a couple of weeks ago. Someone told me they didn't like the Jewish God. And I really didn't know what it meant, but this is now explaining it.
Now you understand the God they don't like?
Huh?
Right? It's a hard God to relate to, for sure. For sure. But it's also a comfort to know that God never does anything wrong. You may not understand it, but God can never do anything wrong. Hatzor tamim po'alo. All God's ways are mishpat, justice. So, I can relax. It's a lot harder to live in a world where that God is not in control.
No, you can't relax, because if God is not that powerful, then it's all up to us.
Aha. So, right? That's exactly right. So that was going to be the end of my sentence, right? Thank you, Sarah, as always, ahead of me. So, right, that's right. I can't relax because I don't have a God who is tamim po'alo. I don't have that. That there's some ultimate justice that I can't see. I don't have that. I have to live with the fact that terrible things happen because there's not a being in control of it all. I have to live with the fact that Nazis get to do what they do and then go live, in South Africa or wherever they go, to live these lovely lives of wealth and luxury. So I have to live with that. So I believe a mature spirituality for me is about, okay, so how do I live with that? What is the meaning I make out of that? The fact that we live in that kind of a world, right? Where there isn't going to be a God who's going to make sure that justice happens.
That's why we support the Southern Poverty Center.
That's right. Because we really do believe it's up to us. We really do believe that. Right? And as Reconstructionist Jews, we don't talk about a Mashiach. We don't talk about a Messiah. We don't talk about God bringing Judgment Day and everything's going to be all worked out. And now we'll understand how something horrible like the Holocaust could happen. Right now we'll understand. We don't have that. We have Yemei Mashiach. We have the Messianic age, and we believe it is up to us to bring the Messianic age.
So that's the shift from being conservative. I'm new here, by the way.
We're glad you're here. Yes, that's a big shift. That is why Kaplan left the conservative movement. Because ultimately, when pushed to the wall, those folks had to say, yes, kashrut comes from Sinai. Right? On some level, this stuff originates there. And Kaplan and his students really, when pushed to the wall, you can say it's divinely inspired, there was a but when pushed to the wall, they would say it originates with us, reaching for the divine. Now, that might not sound like a big difference to a lot of people. But you come to a conversation like this, it's a big difference, right? It's a really big difference.
So I'm just trying to think this through, so bear with me.
Okay.
I find that people who are in very powerless situations, a detained immigrant, for example, the only thing that they can find solace in sometimes is that God has a plan. But the difference is, I think, it's not that I did something bad to deserve being here. It's that there must be some reason, some test maybe, or some challenge. But that lack, when there is no sense of I can do something, then it is a comfort, like a natural human reflex to think God must. That's because that's all that's left. Is that God?
All right. So I want to say yes. It is a very human instinct, right? I need some way to make some sense out of this that doesn't leave me feeling completely.
Right. And that also doesn't blame myself, which is you can't find in this text. Here it is.
Right.
You might want to say, well, there's God's all powerful, and there must be a reason the Israelite was, went through such horrible situation. But if you're going to go there, you have to say they brought it on themselves if you're reading this text. So there's some other.
All right. So yes. So I want to say yes to your comment about instinct. And I want to say it is not the only way to find meaning. There are lots of refugees who are completely powerless and do not need that theology. That's all I'm going to say. Yes, that's one one comfort are people who believe this is a test. I can handle anything. God won't give me more than I can bear. But when you get pushed to the wall on that theology, so your 8-year-old has cancer. Really? And I'm being tested and my 8-year-old has cancer? That's how you're testing me? Frankly, that is not comforting to me. And it puts me in a really complicated relationship with a God I'm supposed to love who tests me with that. Now, some people would say it's a supreme act of faith to say, I can't understand why God would pick this particular test and bring this on my child to test me. But I have to have faith. I understand how that's comforting, and 100%, billions of people are comforted that way. There are millions of other people who do not find that comforting. I frankly find it terrifying to believe that the trials of my life have been brought to me on purpose by a God who is testing me. I left that theology. I walked out because I said, this is twisted. This is really twisted. I want nothing to do with that God. I'd seen too many things, including pictures of piles of children's bodies from the Shoah. No, thank you. God brought this on the Jewish people? So for some people, yes, I totally understand that that's a comfort. For others of us, it just feels twisted and sick to be in relationship to a divinity who behaves like that. People who have ultimate power and behave in really disgusting and irresponsible ways, and you're supposed to just go, but they're the authority. So yes. You know what I'm saying? Like yes and yes. And so I want to be clear, there are a lot of people who do not choose to go there.
Amy, the other comfort that I've seen growing up in the South especially is that we may have to live this life with all these disasters, but in the afterlife we'll be rewarded for our good deeds.
And that is certainly part of our tradition as well. Olam haba, the world to come. Right? The world to come is where it'll all be okay.
But that's not an emphasis in Judaism at all.
It depends. It depends when you're talking.
Yeah.
It depends when you're talking. When things are really terrible for the Jews, you see a lot of writing about Olam Haba. When it's really terrible, the Inquisition, when pogroms when things are really bad for the Jews, you see a lot of writing about the afterlife, about the world to come, right? But in general, it is not the focus, because the focus is
life.
Live your life here the way you're supposed to, and then you don't need to worry about, right, anything else. Yes?
Is the Jew in the Torah that we're talking about ever good enough?
Say again?
Is the Jew here ever good enough? In other words, are you always saying, I'm trying my best, but I must have failed.
It's not me.
I must be failing.
It's not the individual. It is us as a collective.
I don't know. This is what
It's the people.
Correct.
We're never good enough.
Correct.
What a shitty
Reconstruction.
he said, what a shitty idea. These are
It depends who you talk to. It depends which Reconstructionist you talk to.
Explain what you just said.
What? What did I just say?
What you say is new, depending on who you talk to. I mean, yeah.
There's not like a Reconstructionist dogma that says you must believe that. So some Reconstructionists like to imagine there's something else past this. Me personally, I believe it's all energy. Energy can't really go away. It changes, but this is energy. It's just frozen energy, right? And we call it matter, but it's energy. Like any atom is 99% energy. So energy is energy. It shifts form. So do I believe there's something after this? Yes. Because I believe that we are each, as Rami Shapiro says so beautifully, a wave in the ocean. I'm doing the Amy Bernstein wave right now. But someday that will stop. And we don't say, oh my God, what happened to the wave? Where'd it go? Right? We say, oh, right, the wave crashed on the shore and is ocean again. But it was always ocean. It was just doing a wave thing. Right? And so for me, that's a very comforting image. It's a very comforting metaphor that we're always ocean. We're just doing this thing for a little while. A very little while. Like the older I get, I realize how short, right, it is that we have to do this wave thing. And then we crash on the shore and we go back to being ocean. Terribly uncomforting for a lot of people, to Laura's point, right? A lot of people, I got into an argument with a rabbi last year, a really heated argument, because he said it was irresponsible to not have people believe in an afterlife. He said, and I said, you really believe that there's a soul in you? I mean, I knew him well enough to, you really believe that? And it flies to heaven, he says, it doesn't matter what I believe. I said, yes, it does. Like, what are you talking about? You're telling, it doesn't matter what I believe. It's irresponsible not to help people believe that there is something after this. It is just irresponsible. I said, it is irresponsible to preach something you don't believe.
Especially makes you think that whatever he says is as if other people actually believe that. Exactly. He doesn't. What? If you say so, Rabbi, okay.
But it was like, wow, so okay. Like, I mean, when I get some distance from it, like if you heard my sermon about being triggered, so like when I can get some distance from it, because the chutzpah of it is what makes me a little crazy, and so I got all activated. But actually, I'm like, okay, I can understand how you could get there. That you really believe it's most important to comfort people as they're dying. That's the most important thing, is to give them solace and comfort. And that my honesty is not terribly helpful at some times, right?
You don't know, and he doesn't know. And so that's what I find the most kind of crazy thing about it all is let the person believe what they want to. Maybe they're away. Maybe there's something different. Maybe they're the same thing. And it's, who is he to be the one to decide?
No one's come back to tell us.
Well, he seems to really, truly, 100% believe that it is more comforting to people to be told, you're going to see all your loved ones again, you're going to heaven, you're going to be with God. Like, he really believes that is more comforting than anything else you could say to people. And if you really believe that, maybe he is living in line with it. But I was it just flipped me out so bad that, like, you don't believe it, and yet you're selling it because you believe it makes people feel better. How is that different from the other junk theology out there? That you have cancer because you couldn't let go of your anger. It's just like, oh, so if I let go of my anger, I won't get cancer? It's just junk theology. And it's like, how do you do that?
You don't have to answer that.
No, it's a fair question, right? That's the fair follow-up question. It's like, all right, Rabbi, so what do you say? And really, this is too simplified, mostly because we're running out of time, but really all I can say to anybody is you won't be alone. I'm here. It's really all I can say. I don't know what's next, but I believe that the universe is constructed in a loving, supportive, amazing way. I believe whatever is next, if it's nothing, we came from nothing, and then we won't know that it's nothing. And if it is something, I do fully trust and believe that it's yummy, whatever it is, because I believe the world is constructed that way, right? I believe in a loving universe, and that whatever it is that we do next, it'll be cool. If there's something next, you know what I mean? Like, not that I'm going to have a consciousness to know that I'm doing something cool, but, I just have to believe that returning to source is cool, because the source must be awesome, because look at this, right? But ultimately, all I can say is I'm here with you. And then at the very end, I whisper to people to travel safely and speedily, to know that they're held, to know that people love them, to know that they're safe, to know that it's okay. That's really all because I believe that. I do believe that. As hard and sad and awful as it is sometimes, I really do believe ultimately we're safe and it's okay. That we're going to be okay, whatever it is. Even if we just disappear as consciousness, that's okay. We're not designed to live forever. We're not supposed to. And that's all I expect anyone can say to me when it comes. Do you know what I mean? Is travel safely and
Steve Rubin said
rest.
a wonderful thing a few times to me was that our bodies die, our relationships never do.
Yep. And
I found that to be so true. The relationships with people we love are in us forever, and so they're still alive.
At the grave, at the graveside, I often read a poem that basically has that in it, that says, love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Right? That love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
It's continuous, isn't it?
Right. All right, I was going to do this with you, but now I don't know that we have time. So do it anyway. I love Laura. So we're looking at this parsha between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. So that's what Rabbi Pamela Wax was writing about. So go down to the Shabbat of Parshat Haazinu. That second paragraph falls between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and fittingly it contains Moshe's last speech before he dies. In it, Moses is sure to transmit his dying wish that the Israelites recognize God's goodness and rise to their potential. For this reason, the Midah, and this kind of goes, David, to your point. To your point, we always screw it up as a people in Torah. We always screw it up. And it always ends with, I will take you back in love. I will take you back. You will figure it out, and you will return to me, and I, God, am gracious enough to take you back. So that's ultimately the message. We don't see that time, right? We don't get there. Moshe dies, Torah's over, we don't get there. But the tradition and the whole biblical worldview is pointing to a time when we will come back. And God will take us back in love.
So when bad things happen, God will still take us back.
100%. Otherwise, you're right. It sucks. Like, why would you sign on to this whole business? For this reason, the midah of responsibility permeates Moshe's message. Despite knowing that he's about to die, he doesn't squander his final speech on matters of personal import, but on communal needs. Like Ethical Wills or Randy Pausch's last lecture, Moses' final speech says so much about his determination to have a lasting impact on the lives of others. She's, of course, talking about the character Moshe. Like, she too knows that this is put in the mouth of Moshe, right? But we're talking about the character. We're entering the literature, we're entering the story. In Hebrew, the word for responsibility is achrayut. So it comes from this shoresh. achar, or acher, right? Both of these meanings are pertinent to our understanding of what this word, I just found this a very interesting commentary. Responsibility, I never made this connection. Achrayut, responsibility, coming from achar or acher. The concept of after, so achar means after. And acher means other. In some congregations, you will hear some people say the Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Yes. And you're like, what is with the D? What's with the Dalet there, right? Because if it's not Echad, it can look like Acher. God is other. So they're being very clear to say Echad, not Acher. Yep. Jews, what are you going to do? All right. So the concept of after implies a recognition of the consequences of our behavior. That what we do here and now surely has repercussions down the line. Think domino effect, chain reaction, or even butterfly effect. When we look at the concept of other in relationship to responsibility, we understand our connection to, and therefore our responsibility for, others. Turn the page over. How do these two different root meanings of the word achrayut connect to each other? In Everyday Holiness, Alan Marinis wrote, when we think of responsibility as deriving from awareness of after, contemplating and including in your calculations the possible consequences of your actions requires that you overcome the urge to satisfy your ego and your desires right now. In regard to the second derivation of achrayut from acher, meaning other, to live a life in which you actively reach out to bear the burden of your neighbor requires that you quiet the demanding voice of desire and ego in order that you can hear the voice and feel the need of the other and respond. Though these roots, achar and acher, may be different, they both connect up to the same stalk, responsibility. It stands for and reflects a central thrust of spiritual growth, which is to rise up and beyond living in our small self, who is interested only in gratification in the present, to evolve into the larger self, who from its elevated vantage point can see and take in both the larger sweep of time and the living presence of others. Responsibility is both the means and the fruit of that evolution. So this beautiful teaching about achar and acher, and that Moshe is trying to pass that on to the people. He suspends his own concern for his own life, essentially being, ended over in order to share through poetry this truth with the people. Poetry is how we communicate, right? Really important and profound truths. So, in that spirit, I'm going to ask Sarah Moskowitz to share her poem as we come to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. I'm going to ask Sarah Moskowitz to share her poem, My People.
My people are the people of the book, the people of many books, books that have been banned, burned, buried, hidden in milk cans, caves, secret closets and compartments, rediscovered and reconstructed. My people treasure old parchment scrolls preserved for centuries, the handwritten script still clear, each perfect letter formed by dedicated strokes of the skilled scribe's sure, clean hand. My people cherish words, metaphors, stories and laws, interpretation and reinterpretation, commentaries upon commentary, strong and subtle differences of opinion, preserved for future generations, for who can tell what change of view and favor time may bring. My people are wildly varied. There are fanatic true believers, mild identifiers, as well as burning rebels, naysayers, and revolutionaries. There are philosophers and scientists, inventors, discoverers, and geniuses of every stripe, leaders, healers, artists, architects and engineers, teachers, singers, poets, and plain folk. My people guard and hold and caress words as one would care for tender babes from generation to generation.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.